Good afternoon, everyone. As the participant list is filling up, as the webinar is beginning, I will begin here in about 30 seconds. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to part 2 of our webinar series on overcoming common infrastructure challenges in energy communities. I'm Brian Anderson, Executive Director of the Energy Communities Interagency Working Group, and we have a great lineup of speakers for you today who will focus on water, on sewer and broadband infrastructure. But before we dive in, I want to run through some quick housekeeping for today's webinar. As a reminder for those just joining us in our webinar series, this webinar will be recorded and it'll be available online along with relevant resources associated with the webinar. All participants are muted, but you can submit questions. I encourage you to submit your questions via the Q&A box. I want to be very specific in the Q&A box, then our participants are able to see your questions. If you have technical help, then use the chat function and send to host. Again, for your questions, please use the Q&A box. You can access our agenda today through a link that is placed in the chat right now. So at our first webinar in this series, we go to the next slide, we discussed transportation and electric grid infrastructure. The recording for that webinar and the presentation materials as well as additional resources are available at energycommunities.gov/past events. Again, energycommunities.gov/past events. Now, as we are going through this webinar series about overcoming common infrastructure challenges, let's take a look at the bipartisan infrastructure law. The BIL provides truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rebuild America's energy communities with safe, reliable, and resilient infrastructure, with investments in foundational infrastructure that can support communities in their transition to a clean energy economy. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Energy Communities IWG is working with our interagency partners to invest in America's core infrastructure by connecting energy communities with the federal resources that support this clean energy transition. These investments will lower energy costs than already are. They enhance energy security, and they jumpstart a new era of clean energy jobs for energy communities throughout America. Go to the next slide. During part 1 of our webinar series, we heard from Ryan Burney, who's a senior advisor for infrastructure implementation within the White House, and some of our fellow interagency partners at the U.S. Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and Department of Labor on how the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law has created unprecedented opportunities for energy communities to invest in transportation and clean energy grid infrastructure. Today, we're going to focus on how investments in water and sewer infrastructure and much needed broadband investments can help energy communities foster economic and workforce development and place your energy community on a path for long-term economic success. Each of these core infrastructure challenges were identified as priorities for energy community stakeholders when we had a formal request for information. And they're also outlined as key bipartisan infrastructure law investments in the second public report, Revitalizing Energy Communities, our second-year report to the President. Today, if we go to the next slide, we have another great lineup of speakers who are representing various agencies across our interagency working group. But first, we're going to have a little exciting fireside chat. Please join me in welcoming Ali Zaidi, who's the Assistant to the President and National Climate Advisor of the Climate Policy Office, Gail Manchin, the Federal Co-Chair of the Appalachian Regional Commission, and Farah Ahmad, the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, for our fireside chat. Thank you all for joining us today as we dive deep into the benefits of the bipartisan infrastructure law and its historic impact on the future of clean energy in America. It is an honor to have each of you here with us and as partners to the IWG as we continue this discussion on how our Energy Communities IWG can support energy communities and workers throughout America. So Ali, I would like to pass it to you to kick us off with a few introductory remarks.
Thanks, Brian, Briggs, the entire team. Grateful to be here with all of you. Grateful for the chance to co-chair this interagency working group and have such wonderful partners in the interagency helping do this important work at this important time. We often talk about infrastructure, and we tend to think about maybe the stuff that's above the ground, the roads and the bridges, the power plants that define our landscapes. Some of what we're here to talk about today is the stuff that sits below the ground. But boy, is it important to get that right if we are going to unlock the full economic and security opportunity that our communities all across the country have in front of them today. Last week I was with Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. We were talking about this massive hundreds of billions of dollar opportunity in climate smart agriculture, which, by the way, when you're blanketed by heat waves and seeing catastrophic droughts out west and precipitation patterns change in the Great Lakes regions, climate smart agriculture feels like a pretty smart thing to be doing. But it's very easy to sit in Washington, D.C. and talk about precision agriculture and drones and being able to pinpoint where to apply fertilizer and how to limit water use by the tools you have on your iPhone. But it's hard to implement if you don't have that backbone infrastructure of broadband, just connecting people to this opportunity. So, you might think of broadband as the way you hook up to the internet, but really it's the way you hook up to the entire economy. And when it comes to water and wastewater, I can't tell you the number of companies that I've talked to that choose where to locate their factories based on whether they're going to have access to clean water and reliable systems to manage their discharge. I actually know a bunch of rural co-ops who, even though it's their primary business to sell electrons, make it their business to know what's going on with their water systems, because they know if all they're providing is electrons, they're not going to be able to get those factories to show up where we need them. So I'm really grateful for this chance to have a conversation about the importance of some of the infrastructure we don't normally see, and connect the dots between that and how we unlock the full economic and national security opportunity for every American in every zip code.
Ollie, thank you so much for setting that stage of why this fundamental infrastructure is so important. Can you help me and our webinar listeners understand how the private and financial sectors can play an important role in catalyzing our federal investments, because it's not enough. So we can deliver projects in the supply chains and economic competitiveness and the climate benefits.
One of my great joys is actually having spent a bunch of time putting these deals together in the private sector. And I've had to do that in spaces where the government wasn't providing catalytic investment and in spaces where the government was. And let me tell you, it's easier to run when someone's being a partner and supporting you versus not. Here are a few different ways that can take place. Number one is private capital can help structure how we finance the front end CapEx. So sometimes government support will run sort of over a period of a number of years, but you got to commit a bunch of capital up front to actually build the thing. In that case, we need more project finance partners stepping up, taking that equity risk with reasonable returns. They don't need massive returns. They're looking at infra returns, but we need that project finance capability to show up in rural and energy communities. That's the key part. Now, for folks who are like, gee, I know how to do these deals, I do them in the suburbs, but do I really want to go to these harder to serve areas? That's another way we can be your partner. So the loan guarantees that are available through the Department of Energy or through the Department of Agriculture, they still need somebody to help put together the project financing deal, but we can help you de-risk it. So that's one way that the private sector can help step up and bring the capital in. The second is to actually reduce the cost of working off the loans over time, right? So you've got municipal entities, you've got really good cash flow coming out of some of these projects. We need to figure out how to securitize more of this, put it into the bond market, put it into the capital markets, and essentially refi for a lower cost over time. So if you're not the wildcatter, you don't want to put the project together, you don't want to come up with the project financing on the front end, maybe you're the folks who can come in on the back end and say, hey, this thing's running pretty well in town X. Let me securitize it. Let me help them refi so they pay less in payments every month or every year. And then the town or the entity or the rural co-op can go do the next big piece of infrastructure. So those are two ways the private sector can help, but boy, we need them to step up.
Oh, Ollie, thank you so much. And Co-Chair Manchin, we were thinking of the places across the country where we need capital to flow. And the Appalachian region is certainly one of those. And so how is the Appalachian Regional Commission utilizing the opportunities in the bipartisan infrastructure law to make sure that some of these investments can flow into and supporting our rural communities?
Well, part of ARC's mission across Appalachia, it certainly involves a focus on diversification of the region's energy communities. However, one of the hallmarks of our work is our efforts to always bring reliable and affordable utilities, such as clean drinking water and sewer facilities, to all of our communities. When these communities have their essential needs met, then they can begin to focus their efforts toward developing sustainable energy solutions at a local and regional scale. You know, it's hard to think that in 2023, we're still talking about providing clean drinking water to our communities, but we certainly are. And while we know that encouraging investments and resources in Appalachia and our energy resources certainly will increase job opportunities, it'll strengthen our energy and our energy independence and boost business viability. But we also know that we have to meet our essential needs first. And we have a long history of providing clean drinking water to our Appalachian communities. And you'd think, well, maybe our job is about finished. But what we realize is by the recent devastating flooding in Kentucky is that you just increase that necessity to either go back and rebuild infrastructure that was there, and you have to go back and start rebuilding. In fact, tomorrow I'm traveling to Ashland, Kentucky to join Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear to announce grants that we are awarding in Eastern Kentucky to rebuild their sewer infrastructure treatment following their flooding in July of 2022, which was historic. So that will certainly go back to rebuilding clean water and infrastructure. ARC is also researching natural gas and natural gas liquids about energy storage in Appalachia. And we're actually coordinating a multi-state input in developing an energy hub. We've recently completed the process of gathering expert feedback to help us develop and direct our future efforts with this energy hub project. Because I think, Brian, at the end of the day, we all know that to strengthen our energy independence, it takes an all-in policy, all-in energy, all-in working together across communities and also across state lines.
Ms. Manchin, thank you so much. And like the Appalachian Regional Commission, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has, the two agencies have partnered together in wonderful ways to help build the capacity in communities to do the types of planning and to for the communities to be able to access the federal resources. And so far, please tell us how the U.S. Department of Agriculture is using something called the Rural Partners Network to help energy communities access resources from the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as many of the other opportunities.
Thanks so much for the question, and thank you so much for having us here today. And it's an important one. I think World Partners Network is very similar and has a lot of overlap to the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities in a really important way. And that's about having an all of government approach to working with communities. So it's not enough to have us all working with one community individually, but in fact, that can create a lot of burden on a place and on businesses, community leaders, nonprofits, because we're not always the easiest to work with. And so the goal of World Partners Network, and similarly with the Interagency Working Group here, is to do what we can to actually do our job, to break our own silos, work together collectively, and actually make it easier to work with the federal government to make sure that all of the historic resources that you shared at the beginning can actually get to the communities that need it most, whether those are rural places, whether those are energy communities. This really is a historic level of investment, and it may not last forever. So the moment is now to really make sure that those resources get to those communities that need it most. And what World Partners Network is doing is actually working with over 20 federal agencies across 36 rural communities to do just that. And they do it in two really important ways. One is we've actually hired full-time federal staff that we call community liaisons, who are living and working in the community they serve. And I think that's a really important piece of how we're doing the work of World Partners Network, because we're all on Zoom calls all the time and we send emails out, but sometimes you wonder, is there someone on the other end? Is there someone who's going to help me actually get my question answered that's maybe really specific to my community or my project or my wastewater project? And with World Partners Network, we're able to actually have community liaisons in rural communities, including energy communities. And actually, we also have state directors who are providing leadership in those states as well, to make sure that there is someone on the other end of that line. And if we don't know the answer, they can find the person who is. They can go to that agency, they can knock on the right doors on behalf of a community, and someone will actually open the door and answer that phone call. And so we're doing that hard work on behalf of the community and shepherding their vision into projects and making sure that all of the right federal agencies are at the table.
Farah, thank you. And one of the questions that has come up in the Q&A has prompted me to ask you, what is the geographic footprint of the 32 communities that the Rural Partners Network spans?
Well, we'll certainly make it we'll certainly put it in the chat, and you can see all of them at rural.gov. And the 36 communities are across 10 states and Puerto Rico. Where they overlap with the energy communities are in Alaska, in southeastern Kentucky, and in West Virginia. But we'll make sure to put all of that information there. So I will say we're not in every state right now. We are just in the 10 states in Puerto Rico and in select communities within that. But these are some of the most, the places with the most economic distress. And even in addition to that, I'll just say USDA Rural Development. I know I'm biased, I think we're a little bit of a special agency, but one of our main strengths is that we do have field staff across all the states and territories. And we have amazing state directors representing all those states and territories. And we've got over 400 field offices. So even if your community is not part of the World Partners Network, we certainly do have an amazing amount of staff who are experts in our rural economic development programs, who certainly will be there. And you can actually walk into one of our offices and make a connection. And we'll make sure to put that information in the chat as well.
Absolutely. And Farah, and thank you for that. And then also to note, the Interagency Working Group has stood up a number of rapid response teams, and I think USDA for leading one in Southern Illinois, as well as all across the country, Appalachian Regional Commission in Eastern Kentucky as well. But we certainly have a footprint all across the country when it comes to energy communities. And so, Ollie, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's certainly opportunities for us to really start the beginning and catalyze the energy transition, our clean energy transition. But there's also a huge opportunity for us to clean up energy communities, put people to work, create economic development, and address environmental justice and support greenhouse gas reduction. So can you tell us a little bit about that, how we can drive greenhouse gas reduction and EJ?
So take well capping as an example. All through the West, New Mexico, Arizona, as well as through Appalachia, Kentucky, West Virginia, elsewhere, we've got thousands of these oil and gas wells that are no longer producing energy, right? They were used and they've been abandoned, but they are doing two things that are pretty bad for the environment. First, they're putting more pressure on the water systems, right? By contributing runoff into rivers and streams, leading to people getting sick through challenges that are being passed through water as a medium. And then in addition to that, they're just releasing methane emissions, which are by some measures 80% more powerful than CO2 emissions, into the sky. So through the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're making the largest investment in American history into dealing with these abandoned oil and gas wells. And what's even more exciting to me is we've been able to team up with folks like the mine workers and others who are really going to be at the front of the line using a lot of the same skills that they had perfected while mines were booming back, 20, 30 years ago, using those skills to put the same folks to work, earning similar wages in many cases to do the remediation activity that we need. So that historic funding, about $5 billion on the well side, 15 on the mine side, is absolutely important in terms of protecting our water, protecting our air, and putting people to work. And by the way, once that stuff's remediated, you can oftentimes get those sites to be repurposed for building out new infrastructure, new manufacturing, new operations in the same region. That's one way to do it. The second is we're getting after brownfields or retired energy assets. Again, taking away that environmental liability, which has two impacts, right? So you've got this brownfield site. It's creating a risk, a real clear and present risk to the folks who live around that site. Superfund site, you got issues for kids who maybe want to run over there and play there. That's a big problem. But there's a second problem, which is because of the environmental liability, you don't have somebody showing up wanting to build the next factory there. So through historic funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law for things like brownfield and Superfund remediation, we're not only taking care of blights in the community, we're actually paving the way for new factories to show up and power the energy transformation. I mean, I think about Appalachia and energy communities, not just as, hey, we're going to create a bunch of jobs for energy workers to operate generation or to move electrons, but gee, we're not only just doing that, we're making the literal materials in Appalachia, right? So you got places like Weirton where you had a steel plant, now is producing battery storage, which, by the way, Xcel Energy in Minnesota, I know that's not Appalachia, but I'll mention it anyway, they had a retired coal plant, their biggest coal plant in Minnesota. They're replacing that with their largest solar farm backed up by power from battery storage that's being manufactured in West Virginia. So this is transformational. And to Chair Manchin's point, I think what's really exciting is the diversity of resources we're bringing to bear. It's geothermal. We've got hydrogen hubs now forming and competing to take power, run it through water, right? And harness a clean source of fuel on which our steel and cement factories can run. So we're in this moment of just incredible transformation. And through the Biden-Harris administration and through the leadership of Democrats in the House and the Senate, and frankly, on a bipartisan basis, folks coming together across the aisle, we now have resources like we've never had before to give a boost, not to do the work of, but to give a boost to communities who want to lift up into opportunity.
Ollie, thank you for that elaboration. It is truly an exciting time to be able to create the opportunities for participation of energy communities into the energy transition all across the supply chain as well.
Yeah, that's all folks are asking for, right? They're standing there and they're thinking, I got land, give me the tools that I can transform this into economic prosperity for the country. I've got resources under my land, give me the resources to harness that for baseload clean power for the grid, right? So that's what folks want. They don't want you to do it for them, but we're finally giving them the tools to compete on the global stage.
That's right. And then we're not talking about it today, but all the opportunities in brownfields redevelopment from the EPA to abandoned mineland reclamation as well, to make those sites that have been historically used ready to participate into the energy future. And so Co-Chair Manchin, one big aspect of what we're talking about today is broadband. And can you speak to the Appalachian region and how important it has been for us to invest in broadband across the ARC states and counties?
Brian, there's really an irony here. When the Appalachian Regional Commission was formed in 1965, its main mission was to build a highway system through the mountains of the Appalachian. And we're continuing to do that. We're about 91% complete with that highway system. But COVID has certainly brought to our attention and a spotlight on the fact that now we have a second highway system that has to be built through these Appalachian mountains, and that's the broadband system, because we found when children were sent home to attend school virtually, parents were sent home to work virtually from their home, they couldn't. A large percentage of them couldn't because there was not broadband connectivity into these rural communities. And so it's essential. This is not a luxury anymore. This is an essential item for the day-to-day life of all people. And certainly in seeking parity for the Appalachian region, it is about everyone having the same access to telework, to health visits, to online learning for students, for all of these things. And so, we talk about, we have our new multi-state grant opportunity called Arise, which we're encouraging our states to work together so we can do things that are transformational, as Ollie was talking about. But our very first award as an Arise grant was to Connect Humanity, which was a $6.3 million project, which will go to serve 50 of the most underserved communities in each subregion of the Appalachian region. So it truly is connecting 50 of our most underserved communities together for broadband access and growth. And in addition, the ARC recently partnered with the Consumer Outreach Division of the FCC to raise awareness of a program that they have, a $14 billion program, Affordable Connectivity. So this program reduces internet access barriers by providing eligible households with up to $30 a month to help cover their internet bills. Because what happens, the internet gets out to that last mile, and then the people that live out there say, but I can't afford the internet costs. So this is certainly a help in that direction. In fact, we believe that nearly 3.5 million households in Appalachia qualify for these programs, and yet only about 41% of them have enrolled in the program. So together, working with the FCC, we've coordinated a 4-state tour through Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and meeting with local leaders to help them develop the type of outreach campaigns and programs to get people aware of and enrolled in the Affordable Connectivity Program. So hopefully that will begin to connect a lot more of these individuals. We're also currently working with the NITA to work out how the ARC funds can be matched for the 42 billion, the BEAD program, that Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment program. Because again, this helps serve the underserved communities. So, you know, I'm always encouraging our states to work together, Brian, and you know that. But one of my big bully pulpit speeches in the IWG has been, if we're asking our states to work together, then our federal agencies need to work better together. And certainly we've done that with the USDA, we've done that with EPA, but we need to continue to do that. Where people can use our funds for a grant, that's wonderful. But if you can use our funds to match with a bigger grant from one of the other federal agencies, then we need to help you understand how you can go about doing that. So it is a team effort, I think, both at a federal level and at our state level, but I think we're making progress. But certainly, if there was ever a silver lining to COVID, it was the fact that it showcased for us exactly what we needed to start doing in terms of broadband across the Appalachian region.
Gail, thank you so much for highlighting that. And far as an example, ARP and USDA do work great together. And but one thing I want to ask you about in terms of the people who are watching today, how can communities use and leverage USDA resources to try to improve their water and infrastructure networks?
Brian, I promise I will answer that question momentarily, but I just want to build off of what Chair Manchin said about high-speed internet and just give another example of how we're trying to leverage each other's resources. So she mentioned FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, which helps make internet service more affordable. At USDA, through our Reconnect program, we help fund the infrastructure, right? And in fact, we just in our recent round of Reconnect, put in about $113 million into 5 different projects in energy communities in Kentucky, Arizona, and Alaska, which we're really excited about. But as part of the Reconnect program, what we did was we said, hey, we should leverage the Affordable Connectivity Program. And anyone who's getting a grant from us to build the infrastructure should also be make sure that they're providing a plan that is affordable and that leverages the Affordable Connectivity Program. So we did that. We kind of connected the dots there to make sure we're doing that and to make sure that folks are taking advantage of it. Like Chair Manchin said, it's out there, but we need more take up of it because it is a resource for people that we need to make sure it gets into the hands of families who need it most. But on the question about water, I'm really glad you brought that up too. So the Department of Agriculture has infrastructure programs for both water and wastewater. And one thing that we have been doing is actually working really closely with the EPA. So the EPA received a lot of resources for their state revolving loan fund for water infrastructure through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we actually didn't at USDA get those same funds for water, but we have existing funds. What we have is the strength of our staff that I mentioned earlier, who has relationships with rural communities and can provide really good technical assistance. So we launched an effort the year before last called Closing the Wastewater Access Gap, where USDA and EPA came together with some nonprofit technical assistance providers like the National Rural Water Association, Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And we said, hey, let's create a specialized team of public and private partners around wastewater. And we're going to work with communities who have really big wastewater access challenges, help them do assessments of their assets in the area, and then come up with a community-centered solution and a plan, and then leverage USDA resources into it, EPA resources into it, and the technical assistance providers resources into it. So we launched that 2 years ago, and we're operating in a bunch of different areas, but We overlap in several energy communities in Alabama, Arizona, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And I think that's just another really great example of when USDA may not have every water resource and EPA has some, and so do other agencies and folks on the outside from the private and nonprofit sector. We can actually create a specialized team and we can work in a place-based way. And I think that's a really good example of how we've been doing that on the wastewater access side. And then the other thing that I'll say is where we can, we've also tried to prioritize distressed energy communities. So like I said, we have a traditional water program as well as energy programs and high-speed internet programs. And so if applicants apply for those programs at USDA, they actually get, a little bit of a boost, a couple extra priority points, because we know those communities really need that infrastructure as they make this transition. And so that's just another way that we're trying to use all the levers we can to make our infrastructure programs more accessible to energy communities.
Laura, thank you so much. And there are a lot of questions that have come in the Q&A. And just so those, if it's your first time joining us in one of these webinars, we will answer these questions and post them with the materials that with the recording, answers to your questions, everything from how nonprofits and regional economic development agencies can get involved, the energy hub that Mrs. Manchin mentioned, as well as cumulative impacts and environmental justice communities, and questions that we really need to answer. But I'm just going to quickly pass one last opportunity for Ali. How can philanthropic organizations get involved and ensure the success of this effort, particularly around workforce development?
So maybe I'll be a little off topic, but I work in Washington, so that's fine, right? So philanthropic, I think, can help in a few different ways. Number one is by building and supporting capacity on the ground to reach these resources in the first place. So, you've got the ARC that is helping build capacity. Sure, absolutely. But they don't have as many boots on the ground as are needed to help people put together the application, put together the team, come together with the concept of how they're going to improve their condition and attract prosperity to their zip code. So that's thing number one, is helping boost our technical assistance capability to help folks access both public and private resources, because the money's out there. The question is it going to go to the right place? That's thing number one. I think thing number two is this workforce point. And, we have in this country governors, mayors, county executives who are very farsighted in terms of developing the workforce that will become the magnet to attract the economic development. But unfortunately, that's not the case everywhere. And they too are very limited in terms of their resources. So if we know where the puck is going, and boy, do we know where the puck is going, let's train people up for that. Folks, I think, want to get to work on these things. And we've got to really lead with workforce as infrastructure in the same way you sort of built that, the highway system in Appalachia because you knew that was going to drive opportunity into the region. We've got to invest in our people infrastructure, and that's something philanthropy can do. And philanthropy should do that in partnership with the Extension Service and with community colleges and with our unions that are organized, ready to put people into apprenticeship programs. But we need a booster on all of that. And then the third thing, this is sort of like a small thing, maybe seems silly, is I think it's really important for philanthropy to help us tell the story of the turnaround that we're seeing, right? For so long, and I grew up just a little north of Appalachia. I grew up south of Lake Erie, but for so long, there have been so many parts of our country that have been defined by a story of flight of opportunity, hopelessness, despair. But this is a moment when all of that is turning around, and we need to make sure everyone hears the good news, because that's going to give them more steel in their spine and more of a sense that if they put themselves out there, they're gonna make it. And so I think telling that story all the way to the grassroots is really, really important, because we need our young people coming out of, high schools and trade schools knowing this is moment for them to help build a renaissance in their backyard. So that's the third thing. So you asked me to comment on workforce. I gave you 2 bonus.
Ollie, thank you so much. Ollie, Gail, and Farah, really appreciate this this opportunity to chat with you. And thanks to all, have a great day. And again, thanks to all of your teams and the hard work that they're doing. We are going to switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about our infrastructure opportunities. But as a reminder, please do submit your questions in the Q&A. We will answer them. And just as a reminder for the administration, it is absolutely a priority to not leave the environmental burden behind for environmental justice communities as well. And so when we think about the investments we need to make in broadband, we've really set the stage, both Co-Chair Manchin and Farah, about the fact that over 30 million Americans live in areas where there's no broadband infrastructure, an astounding number. And so the bipartisan infrastructure law certainly helps ensure that every American has access to reliable high-speed internet through this historic investment. So our next 2 speakers are both from the U.S. Department of Commerce. Doug Lynott, who's a part of the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and Courtney Dozier at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Gail mentioned NTIA. We'll talk about some broadband programs available to energy communities through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Doug, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be a part of this important conversation. Next slide, please. Before I jump into a brief overview of some of EDA grants that have been made to support infrastructure projects, let me spend a few moments explaining EDA's role within the world of economic development and the administrative and programmatic practices it uses to pursue its mission. The first thing I'd like to share is that EDA is the only federal agency whose sole mission is economic development. And EDA achieves its mission through a combination of specific tactics and programming that include, first, support for local and regional priorities and objectives. Second, by investing in strategies and projects that sustain business growth and job creation. And third, through the administration of flexible and responsive programs and operations. Next slide, please. With respect to infrastructure investments, there are 2 primary programs EDA has to offer that I'd like to briefly summarize for you today. The first is EDA's Economic Adjustment Assistance, or EAA program. This is EDA's most flexible program. EAA grants are awarded to assist communities in regions experiencing adverse economic changes that may occur suddenly or over time. Economic Adjustment Assistance funds can be used to support both construction and non-construction projects, strategic planning, as well as market research studies. As the name suggests, EDA's Public Works program can be invested in a variety of eligible public infrastructure projects, and these include water and sewer improvements, workforce training facilities, port and harbor expansion, and business and industrial parks. Next slide, please. In my opening comments, I referred to the fact that EDA supports place-based decisions, priorities, and strategies. EDA's primary partners in this regard are economic development districts, or EDDs. There are approximately 400 EDDs across all 50 states, including 1 new EDD that was recently designated in the territory of Puerto Rico, the first EDD in that jurisdiction. EDDs are the lead conveners and organizers of the regional economic development planning process that leverages the involvement of the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to establish a comprehensive economic development strategy, or CEDS, which is each region's strategic blueprint for sustainable and equitable economic growth. EDA awards the EDD designation to applicants that have an EDA-approved CEDS and at least 1 geographical area within the designated service boundaries that meets EDA's regional distress criteria. Next slide, please. And finally, the SEDS itself. This is a strategy-driven document typically prepared by EDDs, as I just described. The SEDS serves as a roadmap for regional economic growth and resilience. In areas that are not served by an EDD, EDA may accept as equivalents such documents as statewide or regional comprehensive plans, regional resilience or recovery plans, or a combination of these types of documents. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to spend a little bit of time summarizing a handful of recent grant awards EDA has made to support infrastructure under both the Economic Adjustment Assistance and the Public Works programs. This first one is located in the state of Washington and was funded through Public Works, and the category is broadband expansion. This EDA investment supports the city of Anacortes with the installation of a citywide fiber optic broadband network to provide a more complete coverage in Skagit County, a designated opportunity zone. The project will provide broadband service options to the Island Hospital in Anacortes, which enhances the medical community's ability to serve patients locally through the use of video conferencing and consultation with larger hospitals. Once completed, the project will help equip the region with the adequate, reliable broadband service it needs to diversify and strengthen the regional economy. Next slide, please. This grant award was made under the Economic Adjustment Assistance Program and actually a set aside within EAA assistance to coal communities. So this is an energy transition community under this example. It's located in North Carolina, and the category of this project is facility expansion. This EDA investment supports Gateway Research Park Incorporated and the North Carolina A&T State University with the expansion of a manufacturing facility to support the growth of minority-owned businesses in Greensboro, North Carolina. Once completed, the project will attract new businesses to the area, help the region diversify its local economy, create and save jobs, and advance economic resilience to an area that has been impacted by the decline in the coal industry. Next slide, please. This is another EAA grant made with Assistance to Coal Communities funds. The community is located in Arkansas, and this is an industrial park road construction project. The grantee is the city of Batesville, and the funds are being used to construct roads and related water and sewer infrastructure to serve the current industrial park project. With the closure of a major coal plant located in the county, the city anticipates the loss of jobs and negative impacts on the community will be substantial. To alleviate these effects, this project will include the construction of 3 new roads to improve access and connection to the industrial park. Once completed, the project will help the city meet the growing demand for growing industrial space in this area. Next slide, please. And finally, one more Public Works grant, this time in the Commonwealth of Virginia for sewer system upgrades. This EDA investment funds the construction of a pump station, sewer line, and other improvements to increase water and sewer system capacity and support the expansion of a local lumber manufactory in Henry County. The project will make public sewer service available to approximately 14 potential new commercial customers while expanding opportunities for business creation in the area. Once completed, the project will create and save jobs, catalyze private investment, and advance economic resilience throughout this region. Next slide, please. This slide contains hyperlinks to a variety of information available on the EDA website, and the first of these that I'd turn your attention to is at the top, EDA Regional Office contact information. EDA's economic development representatives serve every state and territory in the United States, and that's your first stop in seeking information and assistance leveraging EDA resources. Thanks again for the opportunity to participate today.
Thanks, Doug. On to you, Courtney.
Great. Thanks so much. My name is Courtney Dozier. I'm the Deputy Director of the BEAD program at NTIA. That's been referenced a couple times. And I apologize, I don't have any slides. I'm just going to win you over with my jazz hands, or, I'm going to keep you captivated here through Zoom. But I want to just share a little bit about our program. I know that I'm preaching to the choir and the converted here on the importance of access to high-speed affordable internet. This program really is a representation of bipartisan interest, and certainly the Biden-Harris administration kind of putting their money where their mouth is. It's a $42.5 billion program whose only goal, our kind of metric for success, is connecting everyone to high-speed affordable internet. So we're going to do that by partnering with all the other agencies that we've already heard from, and really making sure that each of our states, we are kind of stacking each of these capital resources to make sure they get across the finish line. So bipartisan infrastructure law passes. We have 56 states and territories that submit their letter of intent to participate in the program, and we're kind of off to the races. Folks are working on, with NTIA, how are they going to get across this finish line, right? We know if this were simple, it would have been done by now. But what I'm really excited about for this program, before joining NTIA, came from government in Virginia, is that this is a program with kind of federal, it exists on the paper, the four corners of the page, but it really is tailored to allow states to come up with a solution that makes sense for them. So the Alaska solution is going to look very different than the Alabama solution. And the program allows for both of those. There's a double-edged sword there, right? Like Alaska could implement an Alabama solution, and that would be within the confines of our program. So we're working really closely with the state broadband offices in your states to help them figure out what is their plan to connect everyone in their state. What does that look like? What kind of technology are we talking about? But also, what is the timeline? What is their competitive program going to look like? So states right now are in the process of staffing up. You can imagine that if you were running a state broadband office that historically had not run a significant grant program, you probably don't have the capacity in-house to administer hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're staffing up. Our team is staffing up. We've got a federal program officer working in just about every one of the 56 states and territories. I'll put a link in the chat if you haven't connected with that federal program officer. We're trying to, like USDA, be very available here. So our team is kind of making themselves known, making the rounds on the ground in the state, so that the USDA state director knows who we are, and vice versa. And if one of us gets a question for the other, it's very easy to ultimately get the answer back to the person in the community that's asking that question. Same with ARC, same with HUD, same across the board with FCC resources. So figuring out how we bring that whole of government approach that is often talked about, but can certainly be daunting for folks in our state. So I'll put the link in the chat for who the federal program officer is, as well as who the state broadband office director is, which will be, I think, a real resource for the folks on this call. So they're working on their 5-year action plan, and they're going to start pretty quickly developing their initial proposal. So it is a state-led effort. The states really do get to come and tell us, here's what we need to get this ball across the end line, but it's still a federal government program. So we have, 19 different subsections for them to kind of help guide them through the process. And that way we're ensuring accountability. It's already been mentioned on this call. This is a pretty historic investment, and we recognize that we are not likely to get another bite at this apple in this way. And so we want to make sure that we are, that folks are being incredibly thoughtful and creative and efficient in connecting everyone in their state. So on June 30th, a couple weeks ago, we released the amount of money that every state will be getting. Ours is a formula-based program based on the number of and underserved folks in the state, according to the FCC map. So states found out at the end of June, they kind of had an idea, but they found out at the end of June the amount of money that they would be working with. In every state, they got at least $100 million. And then it kind of goes up from there, again, depending on the number of and underserved. So they're now working with us on their action plan, their initial proposals. A lot of other requirements in our notice of funding opportunity include kind of a local engagement strategy. And it's more than just, did you host a town hall for people to yell at you about access to broadband? It is really, were you thoughtful? Were you purposeful? How have you engaged the most vulnerable communities in your state? How have you connected with communities that have faced substantial broadbands to access, and what are you doing to be remedying those with these funds going forward? So a lot of different and exciting opportunities when you think about the BEAD money. In addition, I should say NTIA has got a number of other programs that kind of, again, will fold into, I think, all of this stacks of capital. We just awarded almost $1 billion, about $930 million for our middle mile program, which was, of course, oversubscribed by a significant factor, but is going to be helping to build out into those areas that we know still need the trunk or the highway of that connectivity. The BEAD program is a last mile program. It does allow for a middle mile and build out, as long as that is done in concert with a last mile program. So something for folks to consider. We have our tribal connectivity program, which is awarded $1 billion, and they've got another $1 billion to go. Again, in making sure that our partners on sovereign tribal lands are building out to their communities and figuring out, again, ways that we can be working together to make sure that everyone in the state is covered. So it's a pretty exciting time. The states will have until the end of this calendar year. They had, I think it was 180 days from the announcement of allocation, which conveniently is December 27th. So Christmas is canceled for your state broadband office. Send your apologies, care of NTIA, but we'll be working with them to get their initial proposals in the door. Part of that initial proposal is it consists of about 3 major parts. The first one is their challenge process. How are they going to work to get additional feedback on the ground? The FCC map is their kind of starting line. How can they work with industry, nonprofits, local governments to get additional feedback on what they should be funding in their communities? That they'll submit to us once we agree that we're all on the same page. They'll go out into the world, conduct their challenge process. We'll review their initial proposal. Once those 2 pieces have moved forward, they'll conduct their sub-grantee selection process. So that will likely be happening in most of our states next spring and summer, when they'll be running their competitive grant programs. And then once they have submitted those back to NTIA, here's the process we said we would do. Here's what we did. Here are the results. NTIA will give a big green check mark, and they'll begin awarding monies, likely starting in the summer of next year. So we've got a long runway. Our state's got planning dollars in addition, which is another part, again, coming from a state background. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness in this part from the Congress that allowed for us to say, this is a big project. You're going to be asked to scale in a bunch of ways. We're not going to ask you to do it without resources. So every state got about $5 million in planning for BEAD and digital equity. Some cases a little bit more for digital equity. So they're using that money to think through how they're going to accomplish their goal, to engage in that local community outreach, to staff up accordingly. And they'll be kind of primed and ready for when these projects need to start moving out the door. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time. We're really excited. There's so much great work has been happening in this space already. NTIA has been a funder of broadband previously, but not to this extent. So we're really excited about this opportunity to be joining our colleagues at USDA, at FCC, at ARC, and get the ball across the finish line. So thanks so much, Brian.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much. And it's so great to hear how it really is being designed bottom up, involvement in the communities, involvement from the last mile to the middle mile and up. And look forward to seeing the resources you mentioned you would place in the chat. I'm sure the folks on the webinar will appreciate that. Well, now switching gears a little bit, when we start thinking about water and sewer, communities all across the country, in fact, in the United States, do have water and sewer infrastructure issues. And in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's $50 billion for EPA to improve the nation's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. It's the largest investment in water that the federal government's ever made. These investments span the entire U.S., including our tribal communities that we heard from here in our response or request for information, we heard from those on the ground that access to clean water and sewer upgrades are critical. The economic success of communities and tribal communities, and one respondent noted that the infrastructure challenges relating to water and electric lines are very costly due to isolated communities and residential homes across reservations and in rural areas all across the country. And so this really is a priority for us in the IWG and our agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency that I'm going to invite to the stage now to speak a bit about water and sewer programs. So I'd like to introduce Ellen Tarquinino from the US EPA to speak about these water and sewer programs. Ellen?
Great, thank you so much. And really, we're just glad to be here and have the opportunity to talk to you all, because this is such an important issue for all of us at EPA and for everyone around the country, is just really being sure that we are using this opportunity where, just as you've heard throughout this webinar, that we have all of this resources that's available for water infrastructure for, some of the first time for a lot of communities. And so we really want to do this in a way that's thoughtful, that's inclusive, that really encompasses the goals that I think that we all have towards just community development across the country. So again, I'm Ellen Tarquinio, and I'm the director for the Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center here at EPA. If you go to the next slide. We have the job, amongst many other things, at the Water Infrastructure Finance Center to provide the water technical assistance that's going to go out, that's associated with all of this significant amount of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. The first thing I want to start with is that fundamental core value that we all have at EPA, and I know across the administration, but it's really that every community across the country deserves equal access to safe, clean, reliable water, that you shouldn't have communities that are traveling 10, 20 minutes out of their way to just even collect water, if not more so. When we know fundamentally that a lot of communities, especially those who have been underserved for so many decades, just do not have access to reliable water, and they haven't had the opportunity to apply previously for some of those funds from the state revolving fund program that are out there, that we did get, billions and more dollars, that they just don't have the staff that's available in their communities to even apply for that funding, to think about that funding, or to even know it's there. And I know, personally, this hits home for me because, I'm from one of those rural communities in Pennsylvania where it's, there's septic tanks, there's well water, and as I'm watching my home community try to band together to talk about connecting to one of the communities 20 miles up the road, they don't even know the resources that are available to go to. It's volunteers a lot of times who are, working at a lot of these rural disconnected communities, and to expect to navigate the federal funding program and process would be just, beyond the scope. So what we're really doing, and the goal for the Water TA program at EPA, is we want to build the pipeline, build those projects with communities, and really provide the support that's needed for every community to access that SRF funding, and work in partnership with the states to do that, to make sure it's as smooth a process as possible for every community, regardless of the resources, regardless of the amount of money they have in the community, to come in to really make headway in getting clean, safe water for everyone. If you go to the next slide. One of the things that I think is really important to right up front is to say that a lot of the process of applying for a federal grant, we know, is really cumbersome. And so the Water TA program, what we do is we provide money to a lot of these nonprofits, to a lot of academics. Actually, one of the examples you heard from USDA about closing America's wastewater access gap. That's part of the Water TA program we have at EPA, where we provide money to TA providers that really provide that knowledge, that support, that hand-holding, walking communities through what are their water challenges. It walks communities through what are the solutions that are available to you, lays out what are the different options, evaluates, what's the affordability of these options, what's the long-term sustainability of these options for your community, make sure all members of the community are really involved in making those determinations, talking about what's working for them, what's not, what they prefer as a community, has really catered individual plans and programs for that particular community, because it's not one solution fits all, and we know that. It's working with communities to really build technical, financial, and managerial support. That includes workforce development. A lot of times you have communities that the big problem is they don't have certified operators to run that water treatment plant. And the only way to do that is to really build sort of the overall capacity of that community to have people who can actually manage it, do job creation in the process, and help that community work towards that state revolving fund program that, again, it's an opportunity. We've got, billions and billions of dollars that wasn't available before right now for this purpose to help communities access that funding. So if you go to the next slide. There's a lot of different programs that are under there. You heard about the Closing America's Wastewater Access Gap earlier, which is one of our pilots. The big thing I want to say here is there's a lot of different programs, but it's really under this one umbrella that has this unifying front of, can we get and ensure that there's clean, reliable water for every community across the country. And I'll talk about, one of our biggest program, which is the environmental finance centers. And really the thing I do want to highlight is that it's the bipartisan infrastructure law that's providing a lot of this funding for the technical assistance programs to really help communities access that funding. If you go to the next slide. Well, there's a lot of different programs. I think one of the big questions I would have looking at this is, well, what can they do? What does this technical assistance mean? And what are the kinds of things that one of these providers can really help me and my community with? And this is, some of the services, and it's really broad in scope. It's, from the beginning phases where, we've got some water challenges, there's some water infrastructure issues. Is it getting the right community members there, setting up meetings, just hosting those meetings, bringing in different people, doing asset management plans, developing plans in general, and then even walking people through the project development, looking at the engineering services, which we know are oftentimes prohibitively expensive for small communities to actually come in and apply for state funding because engineers are expensive. There's a lot of partnership engagement, looking at, does it make more sense to connect to another system? What are the options and the solutions that are there? Can you help actually build the capacity of a water board? Doing some outreach and engagement of why you actually have to have water rates to be able to pay for these services. Looking forward at what those rates should be, some future financial planning, and then even going through and looking at some of the support for doing bids, looking at some of the change orders. So it's really a wide range of different services that these TA providers can really help communities with. And it's going to be based on what that community needs. First thing they'll do is come in, look at the community, talk to people, have a lot of time where they're actually there on the ground with you all, talking about what are the things that you need, and then building a plan around those specific needs. If you go to the next slide. This is how people can ask for that help. And, I've got the link here. There's the link that, was just dropped in the chat, and it's a really short form. It takes about 3 minutes to fill out. And if there's someone either on this webinar, or if you want to send this out, highly encourage you all to send this out, to apply for technical assistance, to reach out anyway, to say, I would like someone to call me back, come to my community, provide technical assistance for any of the challenges you have. What we'll do at EPA is once someone fills out this form, what we do is just have, a follow-up conversation of what are the things that you're facing, what is the biggest challenges, and then we'll connect you with the right TA provider, the one that sort of can fit some of those initial needs that you're thinking about. It might be geographically located close to you so that they can actually provide that service, and should be that hands-on person kind of in the ground with that community to talk to you all about what those services are, and then they sort of build that relationship with the communities and walk them through that water TA funding process. If you go to the next slide. Again, this is the biggest program that we have here at EPA. It's through the environmental finance centers. There's environmental finance centers that are spread throughout the country. We have ones in at least every EPA region, and we've got a number of national environmental finance centers as well. They've got multiple partners, so they're all over the country. There's a lot spread throughout Region 3 and Region 4 for EPA, so that's sort of that mid-Atlantic, middle of the country. And there's a lot of support that they can provide. There's again a significant amount of funding that they already have just to provide free support to communities to help them assess what are the water infrastructure needs they have, what's a plan to fill that gap. And they'll work with you and any community through really addressing the gaps that are there. So if you go to the next slide. Again, it's a pretty big program with lots of support around the country. And you know, it's a historic level of funding. I think you've heard that a couple times on this call, and you'll probably hear it again through a lot of this infrastructure work, but there's over $100 million that's available for these providers. They already have it. They're already ready to go. And they're really just waiting for communities to come in the door to say, we need help. Can you help us? And so they have the funding, and they're just waiting for the communities to actually help through this process. So if you go to the last slide, again, these are just, you know, some of the, I think, really key links. One is that water technical assistance page where anyone can go on and ask for technical assistance for their community. Again, it's a free service. It's a free thing that's, you know, been paid for thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, where some of those TA providers will just go in and help communities through the issues that they have. And a link to the Water Finance Center, which is what we run. It's got a lot more resources about water infrastructure and development across the country. Thanks, Brian.
Ellen, thank you. This is incredible. We in the IWG have heard over and over again from communities, we need help. We need, you know, we don't know how to navigate the federal government, and for good reason. And so the EPA is really stepping up. EPA.gov/water TA, you get your water technical assistance. There are so many programs in much needed areas and communities. So Ellen, thank you so much for that. And thanks to the EPA. Now certainly the bipartisan infrastructure law has put resources in many different agencies on sometimes the same topic. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture and have their rural program, the Rural Partners Network, as we talked about earlier, and there's funding in USDA in both water and sewer and in broadband. And so I'm really excited to ask now to the stage Ryan Thorne, who's the state director for West Virginia at the USDA Rural Development, and Laurel Leverrier, who's the assistant administrator for rural development and the telecommunications program. And so Ryan, as we heard from EPA, some of the tremendous opportunities and funding, and we know that when the rubber meets the road and we're working right in the state, what's your experience in the water, sewer, broadband area? And Laurel, I can't wait to hear about USDA's programs in broadband. So Ryan, I'll pass it to you first.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Brian, and the IWG team for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. It's definitely a pleasure to join with you all and represent Rural Development's state directors to briefly highlight a few opportunities available to our energy communities through Rural Development's suite of infrastructure programs. You know, I often say that at Rural Development, we are advocates for, investors in, and partners to rural communities and the people, businesses, and organizations within those communities. But the investments that we make in our rural energy communities through our infrastructure programs is a testament to that motto and the work that we do. And I say this in jest, but it's not far from the truth that you can build a community from the ground up with the nearly 60 programs available through USDA Rural Development. It's been stated numerous times already, but basic infrastructure, whether it be water, wastewater, broadband, is foundational to community and economic development. Without the strong foundational infrastructure, safe drinking water, efficient and effective sewer systems, or fast and reliable high-speed internet connectivity, it's hard for a community to grow an existing business and industry, attract new investment and jobs, or even increase their populations. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a rural community with deep roots in the energy sector, regardless of the region of the country, that doesn't share some of the basic infrastructure challenges that we have in West Virginia. But the good news is that at USDA RD, we have programs that can potentially help communities overcome these challenges. And I'll highlight just a few. One being probably our most popular as far as water and waste is our Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. So this program provides funding for drinking water, sewer, and stormwater systems that serve households and businesses in eligible rural areas. These are areas with populations of 10,000 or less. We have both grants and direct loans available through the program, and the level of grant eligibility is determined by the median household income of the service area. Each state across the nation receives an annual direct grant and direct loan allocation. So this program is available across the country. But because grant funding is limited, we often pair our grant funding with a direct loan a USDA RD direct loan, or we stack funding with our other federal and state partners like EPA, USEDA, Appalachian Regional Commission, and others. Funds can be used to create new or upgrade existing water sources, treatment sources, storage, distribution, either in water, sewer, or stormwater. Interested stakeholders, they would apply at your local RD office. Applications are accepted year-round, but I would encourage potential applicants to submit those applications as early in the fiscal year as possible, as funding usually does run out when you get late into the fiscal year. Another program that we have at RD is our Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant. This program helps eligible communities prepare or recover from an emergency situation or an event that threatens the availability of safe, reliable drinking water. Eligible emergencies could include floods, earthquakes, other natural disasters, chemical spills, sort of industrial incidents that have a challenge to or could pose a threat to a drinking supply. Items that wouldn't be eligible under this would be, let's say, a PSD has deferred the maintenance on their system and it happens to fail. Something like that would not be eligible. But like with the majority of our WEP programs, eligible communities must have a population of 10,000 or less. And also the MHI needs to be less than the state's non-metro median income. And so with these grants, we offer up to $150,000 to support water line extensions, repair breaks or leaks in existing distribution lines, and address needed maintenance or restore water supply. We also offer up to $1 million through this program to construct new wells, transmission lines, treatment plants, or other water sources. Like our water and sewer grant and loan program, applications for this are accepted year-round, and you should inquire with your local rural development office. We used this program not long ago in West Virginia in a small community called Payton City, and sort of on the border of Wetzel and Tyler County, which is an energy community. They had a sort of a legacy dry cleaner that went out of business probably 30 years ago. But the chemicals that were used by that dry cleaner finally sort of leached into the aquifer and created a situation that was pretty detrimental to Payton City. So they were able to utilize this program as sort of a quick Band-Aid, and then our other programs at USDA for more of a permanent fix. And I know that every community is different. Sometimes, very centralized public water systems won't make sense for areas that have sparsely populated. And so we have a program called Rural Decentralized Water System Grant Program. And so this program can help qualified nonprofits create a revolving loan fund to increase access to reliable water and septic systems for households in rural communities. So the applicant would receive a grant, and they would in turn lend that out to individuals seeking to repair or to create a new well or septic system in their community. So that is a very great program that we have that serves these communities where a centralized water sewer just doesn't make sense because of population factors. In addition to some of the direct support for projects, we also offer technical assistance and planning support. I know Deputy Undersecretary Ahmad mentioned our Closing America's Wastewater Access Gap. That's going well in West Virginia. We have 2 communities that are participating in that pilot program, McDowell County and Raleigh County, and a couple of the smaller communities within those counties. What's good about this is this pilot program will be a roadmap to scale up these efforts across the country. And I know, at least in West Virginia, the stakeholders that are involved in this pilot program get together once a month, and we have local stakeholders involved, our regional planning and development councils, engineering firms, and others, probably 15 to 20 individuals a month are on these calls communicating to see how best they can fix these issues in these communities. In addition to that, we have our water and waste pre-development planning grants. This program offers up to $30,000 or 75% of pre-developmental planning costs for a project. And so that's a program that you would apply with at your local rural development office. And finally, the last one I will touch on before we hand it over to Laurel to discuss our telecom programs is just the WEP Technical Assistance and Training Program. This is another TA program that helps qualified private nonprofits provide technical assistance and training to identify and evaluate solutions to water and waste problems. They can help applicants prepare applications for our programs and also help associations with improving or operating the maintenance of water and waste facilities in eligible rural areas. So those are just a handful of the programs that we have at Rural Development to help with the infrastructure challenges in our rural communities.
Ryan, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone on the call today, each and every state has a rural development office and a rural development director like Ryan Thorne will be very knowledgeable. You can go to rd.usda.gov and find your state office. Ryan, thank you for those examples. Laurel, let's hear about some
Thank you,
telecom.
Ryan.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurel Leverrier. I get to oversee the telecommunications programs here at USDA. And so we have 5 different programs that help support the expansion of broadband access in rural communities. We provide loans, grants, and loan grant combinations to help actually pay for those infrastructure costs. To put the fiber in the ground, to hang fiber on aerial poles, or in some cases to even deploy undersea cables. We also do wireless service as well. All of our projects are focused on rural communities. And so under our programs, that's primarily defined as communities of 20,000 or less. But just like as Ryan touched on, all of our programs at Rural Development are focused on those rural communities. We have been administering some of our programs since the 50s. It started in expanding telephone service, and today all of our programs help support broadband access. Most notably, our Reconnect program, which was started in 2018. We can provide loans of up to $50 million and grants of up to $25 million, so that we can do some pretty sizable projects under that program. Another program I oversee is our Community Connect grant program. That program also provides funding to expand broadband access, but we limit projects in that program to $5 million or less. Some things I wanted to highlight about our programs, we focus, yes, on rural communities, but we prioritize because we tend to be oversubscribed, especially on the grant side. For instance, our most recent round of Reconnect, we received over $4.3 billion of applications when we had $1 billion of fund to provide. So we really prioritize projects that are the most rural, remote, unserved, projects that serve socially vulnerable communities and persistent poverty communities. In our most recent funding window, we've so far announced about $700 million in awards. And what I think is interesting is over 113 million of those awards have gone to distressed energy communities. So I think it really speaks to how we try to focus our funds to the areas that need it the most. And we know broadband is such an equalizer in terms of community access to education, to healthcare, to jobs. As Ryan mentioned and Farah mentioned earlier, we have state offices all over the country. And I just wanted to emphasize, I know our time is limited this afternoon, that those state offices are such a great resource for us at USDA. If you have questions about our programs, we also have what we call general field representatives that help support our telecommunications programs. They're located all across the country. So if you want someone to come out and work with you in your local community, we have a lot of resources on our website, but the number one key I would tell people is, and it probably applies to all federal programs, apply early, start the process early. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone and they're like, oh, we wanted to apply, but we couldn't get this or that. The earlier you can apply, the better. And also leverage our resources, leverage our state offices. Sometimes as a person, I'm like hesitant to reach out. Oh, I'm going to bother someone. We want to be here to support you. We want to answer your questions. We would rather do that up front than have somebody make a mistake. And so I just wanted to encourage everyone, please take advantage of our rural development state offices. Please take advantages of our general field representatives, as well as our webinars and workshops that we have online. If you want to learn more about our Reconnect program, you can go to our website at usda.gov/reconnect. And you can also find about all of our programs on our website. So Brian, thank you so much for creating this opportunity for myself and so many of us to come together and share information about our programs.
Well, Laurel, thank you so much for the work that you and your team at USDA are doing, and for all of our speakers today. Yes, we are short on time, and we'll remind the folks who submitted questions in the Q&A. We will answer those questions in our materials as we send them out. It'll include the presentation materials and the references that are in the link. And so if you have any unanswered questions after this webinar, you can please send them to contact@energycommunities.gov and contact.energycommunities.gov. You can see it on the screen there, and we are committed to answering the questions, because the purpose of these webinars is to make sure that you don't leave with unanswered questions, and that we get the information out into the communities where it's going to have the most impact. And so there are some upcoming events. You can see in Kentucky on Wednesday, July 26th, there's a Kentucky Area Development Districts and Federal Partners meeting at Murray State. You can see the information here. You can also always find our upcoming events at energycommunities.gov/events. We have a Four Corners rapid response team. As mentioned earlier, we have these rapid response teams across the country, which are bringing together multiple federal agencies to put those resources at the fingertips of communities, much like we try to do today, but in a sustainable way in communities. And one is in the Four Corners region, also on Wednesday next week from 1 to 3 Mountain Time. And then the third event is the Energy Transition Series webinar. This is a webinar number 3 for energy community support. This is organized by the Prairie Rivers Network, which is one of our IWG partners based in Illinois. But this webinar is open to all that is interested. Again, you can find the links on our IWG website at energycommunities.gov/events, or you can find the link at the top of the page. But I always want to give a call to action to those who are here on these webinars, trying to make an impact, make a difference in your communities along with us. Please do stay in touch. Please do go to our website, learn about what opportunities are out there, pepper us with questions, like I gave the link earlier about the questions, any unanswered questions from this webinar, and try to act on these IRA and bill funding opportunities. Certainly the way that the funding comes from Congress requires many times applications, as was drawn out here during this webinar. And we do have resources that are available to help identify how to put those proposals together, like at epa.gov/water TA, for example. And so please do get involved. I thank everyone for participating today, certainly the speakers, but honestly, most importantly, the participants who are logged in today to try to make an impact in energy communities all around the country. As we navigate this energy transition, our commitment is to not leave any communities behind, and to ensure that we are cleaning up historical messes and not creating a mess for the future. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you soon on the next event. Thank you.